Alright, well, the bluing is finally dried for the most part. And I'll just roughly show you how I go about doing this. I'm sure I'll get all sorts of comments and probably some criticisms and all people throwing up their hands and probably a few machinists going, oh my gosh, what's he doing? But this is what's worked for me. I never had any problems, never had really any issues. So again, it's just what works for me. It might not be the proper way of doing something, but it certainly works. So I usually just use the calipers to kind of measure. I mean, you can do an eyeball on it, or you can use a ruler with little tick marks on it. As long as you can make some marks in terms of measuring. I'm just gonna make a real basic ferrule, and kind of a long one really. And so usually what I'll do, and this is in different scales and whatnot. My pattern is relatively simple. Because I think it looks simpler is better. Some guys will carve actual beads into their material, and that's certainly an artistic way of doing things. I have found less is more often. So I'm going to go ahead and ramp this up a little bit. I can do it slower, I can do it faster, but this tends to work pretty well. So again, real firm grip, kind of choking up on this. So that's where I'm going to be cutting this piece off, and I tend to like my ferrules to have a very certain pattern. So it's either a 1-2 line with a separate center line, and then and very symmetrical. They've always kind of got to be symmetrical, or they're going to look weird. Or a 1-2 line or 3 lines and then a center lines. So just kind of show you a little bit of symmetry is really all you really want. Making sure this is secure in here. It's just spinning pretty even. You gotta watch out for the material. Again, wear good eye protection for sure. Always. Oh, that was pretty sloppy actually. I probably wouldn't end up using this ferrule because these lines are much further spaced apart than these three, but it's been a couple weeks since I've had to make a ferrule, and you get out of practice. So a center line, which I'll balance out. That's okay. Okay, so that's in a nutshell. Now, after having turned those lines, there's going to be a sort of a burr on the outside edge of that V shape. So you're going to need to bring that down, and I need to take the bluing off anyways. So I'll just grab some sandpaper. I think I should probably grab. This one will take it off the fastest. I'm just trying to get the bluing off, and then again take down those lines. Not a big deal. Okay. And really, to save myself a lot of steps between this point and buffing, I really should go ahead and use a couple more grits of sandpaper, go all the way up. So 320. Again, sandpaper, all you're really doing when you're changing grits is just going from bigger scratches to smaller scratches. So eventually you're going to have to get to a point where you're going to buff using a triple E compound. And this is just really standard sandpaper. There's nothing fancy to it. That was 800. No, that was 600. I apologize. This is 800. And I believe this is, no, that's not it. Get her up to 1,000 at least. Alright, so it's going to be warm. It's not too bad. At this point, and this can be a little tricky, you can use your, the tool you just used to make the lines to cut her off. And this gets a little bit, maybe a little tricky for some people, and this might make someone shudder. But I found this works pretty well. I'm not going real fast. I'm putting pretty close. You always want to be careful. Don't be touching the outside of the spinning brass, because that's essentially a spinning razor blade. Very gently. I'm not turning it real fast. I'm just kind of letting it's ready to go as it is. Ta-da! Okay. Now what's left over at this point, there is an inside burr there. You kind of want to get rid of that. So for sure, we'll flip it around. Again, be super careful not to touch that at any point with your poor tortured flesh, because you will hurt yourself. I just take to kind of get that out of there. Some 220 sandpaper. I'll make a little cone out of it like this. Yep. So that takes that burr pretty far down. Clean up a little bit more, because that burr you're gonna have problems fitting this ferrule onto your piece if that burr is still in place, because once you use that pipe cutter, it's managed to crimp the material, and you don't want it crimped. You want it an even tube, so you have the same inside diameter all the way across. And actually, if you have a little bit of a internal flare in that tube, it's good, because when you're putting it on, it's got a little bit of that taper effect, and any glue you put on that point at that point will, instead of going over the edge, will get sucked inside under the ferrule. So that's where it is right now. It's got some marks from my chuck, because my chuck has again been abused for the last 10-15 years. But it's a half decent ferrule with a little bit of buffing on a buffing machine, with cotton wheels and some Triple E. It'll turn out nicely.